Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and we're the folks behind abarabove.com, the ultimate resource for craft bartenders, bar operators, and pretty much anybody else who likes tasty, tasty drinks.
So I'm a bar consultant with over 15 years of hospitality experience.
And I run a bar above, which means I help make podcasts like this. He does too. You might have noticed. We also publish lots of really useful articles, and we publish a lot of tasty cocktail recipes on our Instagram at abarabove.
That's right.
It's time for another quick pro tip brought to you by BevSpot. If you're putting together a seasonal cocktail menu for your bar program, don't forget to cost out the ingredients that you're making behind the scenes. Between the actual ingredient cost and the labor time, you might be better off buying premium syrups instead of making them in-house. If you don't know the pour cost of each drink on your new menu, BevSpot's free and easy drink pricing calculator can show you. And no, it's definitely not a spreadsheet. Find it over at bevspot.com/pricemydrink.
This is episode number 131 of the Mixology Talk podcast. And this week we're savoring the great produce of summer. The grocery stores are packed full of fruit, vegetables, and herbs. And it's a really great time to start to dabble with these in your cocktails.
And it's also a good time to start thinking ahead. We've definitely talked about using seasonal flavors before. I think that's kind of one of our favorite topics, of course. But this time of year is when fruit's at its most delicious, and it's also a time of year when fruit tends to be very cheap. So if you're thinking about, I want to be able to use strawberries all year round, now is the time to start thinking about the ways that you're going to preserve those flavors so that you can actually do that.
So that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. Some ideas, some techniques, and some methods of preserving those flavors so you can enjoy them throughout the year.
So as we start to talk about all these different techniques, I wanted to let you know once at the beginning, check out the show notes at mixologytalk.com/131. What I'll do there is I'll include all the links, videos, useful guides, things like that that'll show you how to do each of these techniques. So I won't have to say every single time to go to mixologytalk.com/131.
Unless, of course, you want us to, and then we're happy to repeat it
over and over. You can hit back on your podcast player, your YouTube player, and just watch on repeat. I don't recommend it.
No. So the first topic that we're going to jump into is juices and fruits, right?
Juices and concentrates.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, which makes sense because this is what you're going to think of immediately. Like, want to preserve a flavor, want to preserve a strawberry, juice it, freeze it, done.
Right.
It's the most straightforward. It's probably the simplest. But it does come with a little bit of a loss of flavor. No surprise there. Anytime you go from fresh to not fresh, you're going to lose some flavor.
Sure.
And that's something that you were mentioning before the show was that you can think about actually concentrating your juices. Yeah,
so this is one of my favorite techniques for really intensifying flavors, especially when it comes to juices. It's a topic we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I think, cryo freezing. And it sounds really fancy, but basically all you're doing is you're removing water. Typically, how you would do this would be by boiling, but that creates this really kind of off flavor in a lot of fruits, and especially fresh fruit.
Yeah, it's that cooked fruit flavor, which you may not be going for that.
Right, exactly. So to preserve the fresh flavor, this is how I got around that. So it's cryo freezing. You basically juice it, throw it in a freezer, let it just completely freeze solid, and then bring it out as one big brick, basically. Put it in a strainer, put it over a bowl, and just let it slowly drip. And what you'll notice is that the sugars and the juice itself will thaw before the water does. So what you're left with is this column of clear ice at the top, a bunch of fruit juice at the bottom, and once you get that clear column at the top of just ice, you cut that off, remove it. So you're really basically just freezing the water out of it.
Lather, rinse, repeat. It's kind of like when you were a kid, and I mean, maybe that was just me, but do you ever get your popsicle and just suck on it to get the juice out of it?
Exactly.
And you end up with a popsicle that's just clear ice?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Highly
basically,
technical.
you just, it's another way of essentially distilling as well.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, like freeze distillation. This is kind of a similar technique to that. But it's a great way of concentrating flavor. When you typically see frozen juices in a supermarket, it's in a concentrated form.
It is.
So there must be some good reasons for that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would assume maybe it has something to do with transportation costs.
Probably.
Or who knows. But I think this is definitely a good way to help. Even if you can't keep the flavor exactly the same as it was when it was fresh, you can at least sort of enhance it through concentrating it. So that's definitely one good option. So the second option that I would consider would be using purees. Purees are another good thing to do for fruits or flavors that have a high water content. I know you were mentioning you like to use purees when you're blending flavors.
Yeah, so if you're just doing juices, you have that single note, it's a one item that you're going to preserve.
Strawberry.
Right, exactly. But if you have a cocktail you've developed, you really like the flavor of the syrup, and you want to go through the motions of creating puree, this is a really good option. So if you did, I think you mentioned watermelon and basil, we'll probably reference that quite a bit throughout the podcast, but like a watermelon, basil, and star anise puree, that would be a really good thing to kind of make all in one. So with a puree, typically you're adding acid and you're adding sugar. So it's basically kind of a balanced syrup at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing that I always remember about a puree is that it's balanced. So where you may just juice your strawberry and you're going to have a really sweet juice, that's not balanced. Puree, on the other hand, is typically. So you may add, there may be some citrus juice in there. There may be some other balancing agents like sugar, like you mentioned, so that it is already balanced. Typically, you will see them frozen for preservation purposes. And then when you go ahead and actually start using them behind the bar, you will thaw them.
Put them in a squeezy.
And put them in one of these, which was really convenient that this was nearby.
That worked out really well.
Yeah, really.
But yeah, that's typically how you use them behind the bar. This is for a home use, obviously you can portion those out. So you get one of those silicone molds. Know how much you're going to put in your recipe. So if you're doing a 2 ounce, pour on your puree into your cocktail, or however much you want to put in there, portion those out, put them in a little silicone.
Like the ice cube tray.
Yeah,
right?
ice cube trays. Freeze those. Take them out of the mold because you want to probably use it for ice cubes or something. Put them in a bag, and you should be good to go.
And you can be like us and have this stuff in the freezer for eternity.
Pretty much. Yeah, I think we need a new freezer just to hold this stuff.
There is another solution. We could clean the freezer.
Or buy another freezer.
Or, let's be honest, that's probably more likely.
Yeah, but this is a really good option. Like we mentioned, is if you have this cocktail you've already developed, you know you love it, you want to have it year round, but you don't want to go through the process of making a juice, thawing a juice out, then having to make the syrup, and then, having to juice a lemon or a lime to go with it. If you just want one thing to kind of hit the glass, throw a little booze in it, this is a really good option for you.
Well, I think if you do a large batch format, you can make sure it's really consistent as well. If you don't, otherwise you're going to have to freeze your watermelon juice, you're going to have to find some way to preserve your basil, you're going to have to freeze your strawberry juice, or your whole sort of mix of things.
Right. And next thing you know, you have 3 freezers like we do.
And this is how it happens.
See?
So yeah, purees.
So the next option that we have for preserving flavors is jams, marmalades, or preserves.
Or jellies.
Or jellies. Absolutely jellies as well.
Don't forget the jellies. The nice thing about these is twofold. First of all, they preserve flavors really well. And secondly, you don't have to have 17 freezers.
17 freezers sounds nice.
No. See, why
so
did
close.
I say this? Why
so
did
close.
I say it out loud? They can be stored at room temperature, which is really, really nice. That being said, when you make jams, jellies, and marmalades, you're pretty much always, or by definition, always cooking the fruit. So if you're looking for a fresh fruit flavor and not a cooked fruit flavor, you can probably go ahead and skip ahead. It does not kind of work for you.
Right. But they do, as Julie mentioned, they do carry flavor really, really well. If you want a really impactful cocktail, this is a really fantastic ingredient to grab for. Even the over-the-counter stuff, the raspberry syrups or jams and stuff like that.
It's way better than the prescription.
Right, exactly. Over-the-counter, right. But the stuff you can buy in a store, is really good to add into cocktails as well, just because they carry so much flavor. Marmalades are a beautiful addition to cocktails, so they really pack a punch. If you're going to be using them in cocktails, the way you would use them is add hot water to them.
Which will melt.
Exactly, melt all the pectin and all the gelatin and all that stuff, make it liquid, and then you would add more sugar, because these are typically not as sweet as a cocktail syrup that we would use. So you'd probably want to reinforce that by adding some more sugar to kind of amplify that.
Definitely. And of course, the other side benefit, which you cannot overlook, is that you can have it on toast.
It's so delicious. Chris
recently made a blood orange marmalade for a cocktail, and I think I ate all of it.
Yeah, and it is a really good benefit too, because it preserves well. Put it in the fridge, and it's just tasty on toast.
It's good on toast. So next up are shrubs. This is something we've definitely talked about in the past, but it's also something that I would say to be careful with. Shrubs are basically a drinking vinegar, which might sound gross, and that's exactly my concern. If you're not used to drinking vinegar, then, or I should say, if you're not used to drinking shrubs, then this might be a little bit off-putting. And the same for your customers. I think they're delicious because I've had them a few times and I've kind of gained a taste for it. But if this is an ingredient that when you use it in cocktails, it can be a little bit divisive. Yeah,
exactly. Like that just kind of punch of vinegar flavor is going to come through acetic acid. And so just be careful with it. Yeah. I tend to use a softer vinegar than like a super intense white vinegar, just because the more subtler ones still get the job done without overpowering your palate. So I don't remember the type we use. I think it's DA2P2. It's a sugarcane vinegar.
There's also, I know champagne vinegar has been highly recommended. It's a little bit more costly than the cheap sort of under the kitchen sink stuff.
Right.
But it also tastes better. So.
Yeah, and this is a way that, I mean, we've been focusing a lot on fruits up to this point. This is a way to really start incorporating some of the herbs that come from summer. It's a great time of the year for herbs as well, so incorporating this into your shrubs could be a really great thing for preserving some of those flavors as well.
Yeah, shrubs work nicely for things that, for certainly fruits, certainly anything that you would put in like a salad. Almost.
Yeah,
anything you throw with balsamic. I mean, strawberry, watermelon, basil.
Watermelon basil.
There it is.
That's right. Absolutely.
Things like that work really nicely in shrubs, but honestly, I've seen a huge variety of shrubs, and I've seen them work really, really nicely. The nice thing about shrubs, like Chris mentioned, is you can start to use these ingredients that don't have a high sugar or high water content alongside. So I wouldn't necessarily make a basil shrub, but I might make a watermelon basil shrub. So you can kind of incorporate that, because I think in some ways the vinegar almost creates an infusion. Yeah. So it really brings out both of those flavors quite nicely.
Right, and a lot of the techniques that we're talking about are really old techniques. There's nothing new as far as preserving flavors. This is something that people have been working on for probably centuries, many centuries,
long before there were freezers.
Right, exactly. So it kind of makes sense we can go back to some of these and take a look at them and how we can apply them to the bar community. I know the shrubs have been around since like the colonial 1800s.
Apparently they were really big in colonial America.
Right, and probably even before that. That's just of what's coming to mind. But like we mentioned, this isn't anything new, but mastering them can be a little bit challenging, especially with vinegar. So another technique, and this one is fairly common behind the bar and probably in the house, if you're a home bartender, is infusions. Infusions, tinctures, liqueurs, I kind of bundle them all together because you're utilizing a lot of the same techniques.
Yeah, I think this one is where we really step away. Well, I just won't say away. You really step towards using ingredients that have a low water content. This is a great option for things like herbs, spices, peppers, things like that, because you don't need to have that water content to make it work. You're not going to juice basil. That's just not going to work for you, unless you figured it out, in which case I want to hear all about it. But that's why infusion really comes into play. And I think one thing that Chris was mentioning to me earlier is that when you do make an infusion with fruit, which you can certainly do, you would like to take it one step further, right?
Yeah, whenever I've worked with infusions in the past and make it like a strawberry margarita, for example, I always find that it doesn't have the same kind of sweetness that I'm looking for. So my kind of workaround with that was just to make a liqueur, to add sweetness into the infusion, possibly even add some more of the juice to it as well. So if we're doing strawberry, I would juice some strawberries, add some sugar to it to almost make a syrup, and then add it to the infused alcohol, and that'll help drop the alcohol level so it won't be so hot. And then you get that really kind of multi-dimensional or multifaceted strawberry flavor that you would normally get.
And you also get the preservation the preservation qualities of the sugar as well as the alcohol. Certainly, I mean, alcohol is a fantastic preservative, but adding the sugar works well as well. That's why you see things like limoncello. Right,
exactly. So that, and then with tinctures, you're basically just doing a high infusion. So you're adding a lot more material to your infusion. So, if you're doing a pound of strawberries to a liter of vodka. Oh, here you go.
Persimmon.
Yeah, there you go. That's persimmon.
We keep these under the bar.
Right. So this is our tincture library. So I have probably 30 different flavors of highly concentrated tinctures. So basically, you're just adding a ton of material to alcohol to really get as much flavor out as possible. Because when you use these in cocktails, as many of you know, you're using drops for an entire drink instead of an ounce and a half.
Right.
So they're really concentrated. And this is where the dried ingredients really shine. As Julie mentioned, spices are fantastic. Many different types of peppers are really good. Like jalapenos are really intense, or serranos or something like that. So you don't want a lot of that.
Yeah, be careful with infusing peppers.
Yeah. They can run away real quick.
Yeah, you might infuse your strawberry for 3 weeks, but you might infuse your habaneros for 3 minutes.
Right, literally.
You're going to want to watch those really closely.
Yeah.
So the other side of having really great fruit is that you get the benefit of really great garnishes. So we wanted to talk about 2 different ways that you can use this fruit to make really great preserved garnishes.
Right.
So the first way is pickling. I think this is, no surprise here, especially for things like the Bloody Mary. There's all sorts of things that you typically see pickled that are often used to garnish a Bloody Mary.
Yeah, absolutely. You can think of a lot of the classic ones. The
onions, green beans,
carrots,
pickles,
even
gherkins.
Yeah, exactly.
Carrots,
yeah, pickled
good.
Carrots. So, there are a lot of things. Onions, pickled onions. So a lot of things you could really start to pickle and incorporate into some of those fall and winter cocktails if you want to preserve those flavors. The other one is dehydrated zest that you mentioned.
Yes.
And on the pickling note, save that liquid that you're making, because you can make a really cool pickleback if you like pickleback drinks. So you can make
pickleback
really
mixology.
Elaborate pickling juice that is perfectly paired with gin or something like that instead of bourbon.
I have never heard of craft picklebacks.
I know, how cool would that be?
You so want to do that now,
I do.
Somebody's got to be doing it.
I'm sure there's.
I'm 100% sure.
I'm sure there's somebody doing it. And if you are, we'd love to hear from you.
Definitely comment in the show notes or email me or something.
Yeah, because that's just cool.
I want to hear about it.
But when we talk about pickling, we're talking very similar to shrubs. You're going through a lot of the similar processes. You're using a lot of the similar ingredients, typically sugar. I think with pickling, you're adding salt. And then vinegar.
It's like a savory shrub.
Right, exactly.
But I think your octane is probably higher on your vinegar.
Oh, it's almost 100% vinegar focus. Yeah, so
don't drink it unless you're
but it's a very similar process to shrubs, making shrubs. But the other one is dehydrated zest, and this comes in a couple different forms, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing a lot more of this on menus, or I should say on craft cocktails. I think you did a beautiful cocktail a few months back using a dehydrated
the blood orange.
It was the blood orange cocktail.
Yeah, exactly. So
up twice.
This is a great way of preserving items, using everything you can at your disposal by dehydrating them. You can incorporate them back into infusions if you want to, because they're low water items. They're going to really deliver a lot of flavor. You can use it for garnishes. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. The other options that you have for dehydrating, because typically you put it in the oven, let it slowly pull the water moisture out of it.
Unless you have a dehydrator.
Right, exactly.
You probably only have that if you do this a lot.
Yeah, so the other options you have is utilizing salt or sugar. So you can dehydrate it with salt. This is a really old school technique. I know that I think Moroccan lemons are a thing where you just basically cut lemons open, pour a ton of salt on them, and then you use them throughout the year. And then with the sugar, you could do candied zests and wheels and sugars and stuff like that.
There's a lot that you can do in that regard as well. And of course, there's always dried fruit. I mean, I think that we don't often use things like dried apricots much in cocktails, but I mean, I think it's a great option for a garnish, especially if you're using apricots in the drink. And then you could go crazy with this with any sorts of dried fruit. Some are going to work better than others. I've never seen somebody pull off a dried watermelon, but I haven't personally tried. Yeah. So there's that.
The watermelon shrunk to about that big. It was the craziest thing. And I mean, we haven't really even talked about. We're talking about garnishing now, but like cherries, doing like maraschino cherries and stuff like that. I mean, cherries are the only ones that come to my mind. Sure. But I'm sure
it's
you
kind
can...
of candying.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure you could probably do that with strawberries and other things too. So if you've tried other fruit garnishes like that,
I would be curious. Definitely let us know.
Yeah. So hopefully today's episode has inspired you to go back to your local supermarket or farmer's market and do a little bit of shopping. By the way, you typically don't need the best looking fruit to get great results. So you can ask your local grocery or the farmer's market if they have any rejects, any ugly fruit, and see if you can get a discount. Another thing is wait till the end of a farmer's market, because the last thing they want to do is pack this stuff up and take it back home.
Especially if it's ugly.
Yeah, so if you're looking to make some serious bulk production stuff, I know a couple of my friends have done this in the past and got great rates on like a case of apples for like nothing. So this could be something you try as well.
Definitely, yeah. And if you're the kind of person who's into this sort of thing, if you have ever experimented with dehydrating a watermelon or that sort of thing, or maybe you have 3 freezers filled with your purees and juices and such, then you might be the kind of person who would enjoy our certification program. We've created this, I think, pretty cool program where we go into a lot of depth about these different techniques, about all the things that you need to know to really start creating your own cocktails. It's an online course. It's completely on the web, totally available anywhere. And it also comes with a Facebook group filled with other nerds. So there's that. If you're interested, check it out, mixologytalk.com/certification, and use the coupon code MixologyTalk for 20% off. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. I really love nerding out on this sort of stuff. If you do want to check out any of the links or resources that we sort of touched upon in this episode, go to mixologytalk.com/131. We'll catch you in a couple weeks. Sorry.
I'm kidding.
Spunky.
Yeah, caffeine.
I like it.